"Don't you dare show your face at our Thanksgiving table, you old fool!" My daughter-in-law exploded, kicking me out of the house I bought and paid for over the years. I just smiled, canceled every cent of their financial support, and disappeared. By sunrise, she was pounding on my door with a face ashen from panic, begging me to take it all back. Before listening to this story, we have an important announcement for you. Unfortunately, we are discontinuing this channel, and it will be deleted soon. If you want to continue listening to new stories, subscribe to our new channel, Cold Revenge. The link to it will be in the collaboration with this video, in the description of this video, and in the comments. Thank you for your attention. My name is Walter Pierce. I'm 68 years old, and I live on Lake Norman, about 45 minutes north of Charlotte, North Carolina. For 32 years, I ran the kitchen at the Carolina Table, one of the finest restaurants in the city. I retired 5 years ago, thinking I'd spend my golden years fishing, making my own lures, and maybe finally reading through my collection of vintage cookbooks. Simple pleasures for a simple man. But life had other plans, or rather, my daughter-in-law did. Let me tell you about Tiffany. My son Derek met her 6 years ago at some networking event downtown. He came home that night with stars in his eyes, talking about this incredible woman. Beautiful, ambitious, a rising interior designer. I was happy for him. Derek had always been a good kid, a little soft maybe, the kind of person who'd rather walk away from a fight than stand his ground. I thought Tiffany might give him some backbone. I was wrong. The first time I met her, she smiled so wide I could count her teeth. She called me Dad before I'd even learned her middle name. She complimented my cooking, asked about my career, laughed at my jokes. Classic first impression performance. I've seen enough people in my life to recognize when someone's playing a role. But Derek was happy, so I kept my mouth shut. They got married 2 years later. Small ceremony, nothing fancy. I paid for most of it, of course. Tiffany's mother, Gretchen, a woman who could find fault in a sunset, contributed nothing but opinions. That should have been my first real warning sign. After the wedding, Derek asked if I could help them temporarily with housing, just until they got on their feet, he said. Tiffany had some business debts. The market was tough. They needed a fresh start. So I bought them a house. Not gave. Bought. A 4-bedroom colonial in Myers Park, one of Charlotte's nicest neighborhoods. $485,000. I put it in my name. My accountant's advice for tax purposes. Or so I told Derek. Truth was, something in my gut told me to keep that card in my pocket. That was 4 years ago. Since then, I've been paying their mortgage, $2,150 every month, their homeowner's insurance, their utilities. And somehow, Tiffany's credit card ended up linked to my account too. Designer handbags, spa treatments, lunches at places where a salad costs $40. I watched the statements pile up and said nothing. $5,200 a month, $6,400 a year, nearly $250,000 over 4 years, all flowing from my retirement account into their lives. And what did I get in return? Rules. Tiffany had rules about when I could visit. Never on weekends, those were their time. Never without calling first. She needed to prepare. Never stay too long. I made her uncomfortable. I watched my son transform. The boy who used to run to greet me when I came home from work now could barely look me in the eye. He'd flinch whenever Tiffany raised her voice. He stopped calling me on his own, only when she reminded him, usually when they needed something. But family is family. That's what I told myself every time I wrote another check. The day before Thanksgiving, I drove to Charlotte with my truck full of groceries. 2 turkeys, fresh cranberries, sweet potatoes, everything I needed to cook the feast like I did every year. It was the one tradition Tiffany couldn't take from me, or so I thought. I pulled into their driveway around noon. The house looked perfect, as always. Tiffany insisted on professional landscaping, also on my dime. I hadn't even made it to the front steps when the door flew open. Tiffany stood there in yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, her arms crossed, her face twisted into something between disgust and triumph. "What are you doing here?" I held up a grocery bag. "Thanksgiving prep? Same as every year?" "No." She stepped onto the porch, blocking my path. "Not this year." Behind her, I could see Derek in the hallway. He was holding his phone, frozen mid-scroll, watching us. "Tiffany, I always cook." Don't you dare show your face at our table tomorrow. Her voice rose with each word. This year we're celebrating our way. Without you. You're just an old fool who ruins every holiday with your presence. The words hit like slaps. Old fool. Ruins every holiday. I looked past her to my son. Derek? He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at his phone screen like it held the secrets of the universe. Then slowly he turned and walked deeper into the house. My own son. Couldn't even meet my eyes. I felt something shift in my chest. Not heartbreak. That had happened gradually over years. This was different. This was clarity. I set the grocery bags on the porch, gently, like they contained something precious instead of the ingredients, for a meal I'd never cook. Then I smiled. All right, Tiffany, whatever you say. I turned and walked back to my truck. In the rearview mirror, I watched her face cycle through confusion, then suspicion, then smug satisfaction. She picked up the groceries and carried them inside, probably already planning how to take credit for the meal. She had no idea what she'd just done. The drive from Charlotte to Lake Norman takes about 45 minutes. That evening, it felt like hours. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. It kept circling back through years of moments I'd tried to forget. I remembered the first Christmas after they moved into the house. I'd arrived early to help with dinner, arms full of presents. Tiffany had met me at the door with that same smile she always wore, the one that never reached her eyes. Walter, we talked about this. No gifts over $50. You're making us look bad. I'd spent weeks choosing those presents. A vintage watch for Derek that matched one my father had given me. A first edition cookbook for Tiffany, since she'd mentioned wanting to learn to cook. They sat unopened under my tree for months afterward. Then there was Derek's birthday 2 years ago. I'd driven down to surprise him, planning to take him fishing like we used to when he was a kid. I found him sitting alone in his car in the driveway, staring at nothing. What's wrong, son? He'd looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Tiffany says I spend too much time with you. She says I need to choose where my priorities are. And what do you say? He never answered, just went back inside. The memories kept coming as the highway stretched before me. The time Tiffany uninvited me from Derek's promotion dinner because she'd already filled the table. The Thanksgiving when she served store-bought pie and told guests I'd been too tired to cook. The phone calls that went unanswered, the texts that got one-word replies. I'd made excuses for all of it. She's stressed. She's adjusting. Derek will stand up for me eventually. But today, watching my son walk away while his wife called me an old fool, today something finally broke. Not my heart. My patience. By the time I pulled into my driveway on Lakeshore Lane, the sun had set. The lake stretched out behind my house, black and still. I sat in the truck for a long moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Then I went inside. My house is nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, a workshop in the basement where I make my fishing lures. I bought it outright 15 years ago. Paid cash, no mortgage. It's mine in a way that house in Myers Park will never be theirs. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table thinking. 4 years, $249,600. That's how much I'd given them. I knew the exact number because 3 months ago I'd sat down and calculated it. Every mortgage payment, every insurance premium, every spa day and designer bag and overpriced brunch. That was the same week I'd hired Sharon Bennett. I found her name through a simple search. Real estate attorney, Charlotte area, 20 years of experience. No personal connection, no friendship, just a professional relationship. I'd walked into her office on South Tryon Street with a folder full of documents and a simple question. What are my options? She'd given me a thorough answer. I went down to my basement. In the corner behind my workbench sits a small safe. I keep important things there. Birth certificate, military discharge papers, some bonds, and a manila folder I'd prepared months ago. I pulled out the folder and spread its contents on my workbench. The deed to 1847 Elmwood Drive, Myers Park, Charlotte. Owner, Walter Raymond Pierce. Copies of every bank transfer I'd made over 4 years. Dates, amounts, recipients. A notarized letter from Bennett and Associates, addressed to the current occupants, informing them that they had 60 days to vacate the premises. That letter had been sitting in this folder since August. I'd hoped I'd never need to send it. I'd hoped Derek would wake up. I'd hoped things would change. Hope is a dangerous thing when you're dealing with someone like Tiffany. I carried the folder upstairs and opened my laptop, logged into my bank's website. The familiar dashboard appeared. Checking, savings, investment accounts. All the money I'd spent 40 years earning, now slowly bleeding out to support people who couldn't stand my presence at their holiday table. My cursor hovered over the automatic payments section. Mortgage, Myers Park property. Status. Active. Amount, $2,850. Next payment, November 28th. Tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day. I clicked cancel. A pop-up asked if I was sure. I clicked yes. Homeowner's insurance, Derek Pierce. Status. Active. Cancel. Yes. Utilities account, 1847, Elmwood Drive. Cancel. Yes. Credit card, Tiffany Pierce. Authorized user. Remove user. Confirm. One by one, I watched the payments disappear from my schedule. $5,200 a month. Gone with a few clicks. It felt like setting down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I picked up my phone. 11 missed calls from Derek, 6 from Tiffany. A string of text messages I didn't bother reading. I powered it off and placed it in my desk drawer. The letter from my attorney was already in the mail. I'd sent it 3 days ago. Time to arrive on Thanksgiving. By tomorrow afternoon, Derek and Tiffany would know the truth. They didn't own that house. They never had. They'd been living in my property, on my generosity, for 4 years, and now that generosity was over. I walked to my window and looked out at the lake. The moon cast a silver ribbon across the water. Somewhere out there, a fish jumped, breaking the silence. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. My son and his wife would sit down to a feast they didn't cook, in a house they didn't own, paid for by a man they'd just thrown away. Let them celebrate. I had work to do. I woke up the next morning to silence. Not the usual silence of my lake house. This was different. This was the silence of a man who'd finally stopped waiting for permission to live his own life. Thanksgiving Day. I made coffee, scrambled some eggs, and sat on my back porch watching the mist rise off Lake Norman. My phone was still in the drawer where I'd left it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to check it. Around 10 in the morning, I took my fishing rod down to my dock. The air was cold, mid-40s maybe, but I dressed warm. I cast my line and let my mind wander. In Charlotte, right about now, the mortgage payment would be bouncing. The bank's automated system would be sending its first notification. I could picture Tiffany's face when she saw it, that brief flash of confusion before she reached for her phone to call me. Good luck with that. I caught 3 bass that morning. Nothing trophy-worthy, but decent enough. I cleaned them on the dock, tossed the guts to the gulls, and went back inside to fry them up for lunch. A simple meal for a simple day. Meanwhile, 45 miles south, the dominoes were falling. I didn't know the details then. I learned them later, piecing together the timeline from what Derek eventually told me. But I can imagine how it played out. Tiffany checking her phone between basting the turkey, seeing the bank alert, frowning. Payment declined? What payment? Then checking the account. Then checking again. Then calling me. Once, twice, 5 times, 10 times. Each call going straight to voicemail. Derek, your father isn't answering. Derek probably shrugged. He'd learned not to get in the middle. Let her handle it. But by evening, Tiffany's confusion had turned to something else. She'd logged into the bank portal and seen the truth. The payment wasn't declined. It was canceled. Deliberately, from my end. She checked the insurance. Canceled. Utilities. Canceled. Her credit card, the one she'd maxed out 3 times this year alone, removed from my account entirely. I imagine her standing in that kitchen, surrounded by Thanksgiving leftovers, her face going pale as she finally understood. The money tap had been turned off. Derek, we have a problem. Back at my house, I was finishing my fish and washing it down with a cold beer. I thought about turning on the phone just to see how many messages had piled up. Then I thought better of it. Some things are better savored slowly. The next morning, I drove into town for supplies. Stopped at the hardware store, the grocery, the bait shop. I chatted with Nancy Coleman, my neighbor, who asked if I'd be having family over for the holiday weekend. Not this year, Nancy. Just me and the lake. That's a shame. Family should be together. I smiled. Sometimes family needs to learn what together actually means. She gave me a puzzled look, but didn't press. Good woman, Nancy. Knows when to mind her own business. When I got home, I checked the security camera I'd installed on my front porch last summer. A notification showed activity. A car had pulled into my driveway around 2 in the afternoon while I was out. Silver SUV. Tiffany's car. I watched the footage. She'd gotten out, walked to my door, knocked. Waited. Knocked again, harder. Looked through the window. Walked around the side of the house. Came back. Knocked one more time. Then stood there for a full minute, hands on her hips, before getting back in her car and driving away. She looked angry. Good. The next few days followed a pattern. Each morning I'd check my camera and find more footage. Tiffany's car, then Derek's sedan, then both cars together. They'd knock, peer through windows, even tried calling out my name. I was home the whole time. I just didn't answer. On the third day after Thanksgiving, they drove up together. I watched through the upstairs window as they got out and approached the house. Tiffany was talking rapidly, gesturing. Derek walked behind her, shoulders hunched like a kid being dragged to the principal's office. She pounded on the door. "Walter, we know you're in there. Your car is here." I stood by the window, coffee in hand, and watched. "This is ridiculous." Her voice carried clearly through the glass. "You can't just ignore us. We're family." Family. Funny word coming from her. Derek said something I couldn't hear. Tiffany whirled on him, snapping a response. He flinched, that familiar flinch I'd seen 100 times, and took a step back. They argued for a few minutes on my porch. Then Tiffany threw her hands up and marched back to the car. Derek lingered, looking at the house. For a moment I thought he might have seen me in the window. But then he turned and followed his wife. The silver SUV disappeared down Lakeshore Lane. I finished my coffee. Somewhere in Charlotte, an envelope was sitting on their kitchen table. The letter from Bennett and Associates. They'd probably found it by now. The waiting was almost over. They found the letter on Monday. I know because Derek finally got through to me. Not by phone, but by text. I'd turned my phone on briefly to check messages, and there it was. A wall of text from both of them, but one from Derek caught my eye. "Dad, we got a letter from some lawyer. What is this? Please call me." I didn't call, but I did read the rest. Tiffany's messages were a masterpiece of escalation. The first few were almost polite. "Walter, there's been a banking error. Please call us." Then concerned, "We're worried about you. Why won't you answer?" Then demanding, "This isn't funny. Call us now." Then threatening, "If you don't respond, we'll call the police for a wellness check." I smiled at that one. Go ahead, I thought. The police will find a healthy 68-year-old man enjoying his retirement. What a crime. Derek's texts were different, shorter, sadder. "Dad, please. What did we do? Can we just talk? What did we do?" As if he didn't know. As if he hadn't stood there in that hallway and watched his wife throw me out of my own property. I put the phone away and got on with my day. That afternoon, I drove to Charlotte for a meeting with Sharon Bennett. Her office was in one of those sleek downtown buildings, all glass and steel, very professional. I'd been there twice before, both times to prepare documents. This time was different. "Mr. Pierce," she shook my hand and gestured to a chair. "I received confirmation that the notice was delivered. Your son and his wife signed for it on Thanksgiving Day, though I suspect they didn't open it immediately. They did not. I've already received a call from someone claiming to represent them. A woman, not a lawyer, just the wife. She was quite agitated. That sounds like Tiffany." Sharon Bennett was not a woman who smiled easily, but the corner of her mouth twitched. She demanded to know on what grounds you were evicting her family. I explained that as the property owner, you have the legal right to terminate any informal tenancy arrangement with proper notice. 60 days is more than required under North Carolina law. And her response? Unprintable. She threatened to sue. I told her she was welcome to try. We went over the timeline. The 60-day notice period had started on Thanksgiving Day. If they didn't leave voluntarily by late January, I could begin formal eviction proceedings. Sharon estimated that process would take another 30 to 45 days. "You'll likely face pushback," she warned. "They may claim an oral lease agreement or some other arrangement. Without documentation, those claims rarely hold up, but they can delay things. I have documentation. I pulled out my folder, the one from the safe. Every payment I've made for 4 years. Bank statements showing the money came from my accounts. The original deed, never transferred. And recordings. She raised an eyebrow. Recordings? Tiffany once told me, at a family dinner in front of witnesses, that she knew the house was in my name and she didn't care because family doesn't charge rent. I have it on video. Derek's birthday party 2 years ago. She'd had a few drinks. Sharon Bennett looked at me with something close to respect. You've been planning this for a while. I've been preparing for the possibility. There's a difference. The truth was, I'd started gathering documents 8 months ago. After a particularly ugly incident, Tiffany screaming at me in a restaurant parking lot because I'd mentioned that Derek looked tired, I'd gone home and asked myself a question. If I had to, could I prove I owned that house? The answer was yes. But I wanted to be sure, so I'd started collecting, recording, documenting, just in case. Some people might call that paranoid. I call it prudent. When I left Sharon's office, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, watching people walk by on the sidewalk, normal people, going about their normal lives. None of them knew that a few miles away, in a nice house in Myers Park, a family was discovering that everything they thought they owned actually belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed. Another text from Derek. Dad, we need to talk about this letter. It says we have to leave. This is our home. I typed back my first response in days. It's my home. You've been guests. Guests who overstayed their welcome? The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, how can you say that? After everything we've been through. I thought about all the things I could say. All the times I'd been excluded, insulted, dismissed. All the money I'd poured into their lives. All the silence from my son when his wife treated me like an inconvenience. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I wrote, Ask Tiffany how she introduced me to her friends at your last dinner party. No response. I knew why. At that party, just last month, I'd overheard Tiffany telling her friends that I was Derek's father, the one we're stuck dealing with. She'd laughed. They'd all laughed. Derek had been in the next room. He must have heard. He never said a word. I drove back to Lake Norman as the sun was setting. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple over the water. Beautiful, peaceful. Tomorrow, Tiffany would probably try something new. She was a fighter, I'd give her that. But she was fighting on my battlefield now, with my rules, and she didn't even know it. I had 60 days to see what she was made of, and she had 60 days to find out what I was made of, too. A week after Thanksgiving, I woke to the sound of someone trying to break down my front door. Not literally. No splintering wood or shattering glass. But the pounding was so violent, so desperate, that for a moment I thought someone was using a battering ram. I glanced at my bedside clock. 6:14 in the morning. The December sun wasn't even up yet, just a thin gray line on the eastern horizon over Lake Norman. I pulled on a robe and walked to the window overlooking the porch. Below me, illuminated by the motion sensor light, stood Tiffany. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair, usually styled to perfection with whatever expensive products she charged to my credit card, hung in tangled strands around her face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, the kind that no amount of concealer could hide. Even from the second floor, I could see the grayish pallor of her skin, the frantic energy in her movements as she raised her fists to pound again. She was alone. No Derek. That was interesting. The pounding continued, echoing through my quiet house. Walter, I know you're in there. Open this door. I considered my options. I could ignore her, let her wear herself out against my door like a moth against a window. Eventually she'd leave, drive back to Charlotte with nothing to show for her early morning trip. But something told me this confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my terms, while she was off balance and I had the home field advantage. I went downstairs, put on a pot of coffee, and waited for it to brew. The pounding didn't stop. If anything, it got more frantic. I could hear her shouting my name between impacts. When my coffee was ready, fresh grounds, proper temperature, the way I'd made it every morning for 40 years, I walked to the front door and opened it. Tiffany practically fell inside. How could you? she was shouting before she'd even regained her footing. "We're family. You can't throw your own son out on the street." I took a sip of my coffee. It was excellent. "I'm not throwing out my son," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming my property." "Your property?" "We've lived there for 4 years. We built a life there." "In a house you don't own? On money you didn't earn?" She stared at me, her mouth working but no words coming out. Then the tears started. I'd seen Tiffany cry before, at family gatherings when she wanted sympathy, during arguments when she needed to win. These tears were different. These were real, born from genuine panic. For about 3 seconds, I almost felt sorry for her. "Walter, please." Her voice dropped to something approaching humility. I got heated. I said things I didn't mean. You know how I get. But deep down, you know how much I appreciate you. How much we both appreciate everything you've done. I set my coffee cup on the hall table. "Tiffany, you called me an old fool. You told me not to show my face at a holiday dinner in a house I own, funded by money I earned. That wasn't getting heated. That was the truth. Your truth. But you've spent 4 years treating me like an inconvenience, like a bank account with legs. You've isolated my son from his own father, turned him into someone who can't even look me in the eye. And through all of it, I kept paying, kept hoping things would change." I picked up my coffee again. They didn't. The tears dried up remarkably fast. Tiffany's face hardened, the mask of grief replaced by something colder. "Fine. You want to play it that way? I'll get a lawyer. Derek is your son. He has rights. You can't just kick us out because you're having some kind of senior moment." "Senior moment?" I smiled. "That's a nice way to put it. But here's the thing, Tiffany. I already have a lawyer, a very good one, and she tells me that as the property owner, I have every legal right to terminate our arrangement with proper notice, which I've given. We'll fight it. You're welcome to try. But you should know, I have documentation. Every payment I've made for 4 years. The original deed, bank records, and a video from Derek's birthday party 2 years ago where you told your friends that you knew the house was in my name, but family doesn't charge rent." I watched her face go pale. "Remember that conversation? I was in the next room. I heard everything." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in my hallway. A clock that had belonged to my father, and his father before him. Things that mattered, things that lasted. When Tiffany spoke again, her voice was quieter. The bravado had cracked. "What do you want?" I finished my coffee and set the cup down carefully. "I want my son to come here and talk to me. Alone. Without you coaching him on what to say." "Derek won't." "Then you have 53 days to find a new place to live." She stared at me for a long moment. I could see her calculating, running through options, strategies, angles of attack. She was smart. I'd give her that. Manipulative people usually are. Finally, she turned and walked out the door without another word. I watched her silver SUV disappear down Lakeshore Lane, then went back to the kitchen to pour myself another cup of coffee. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. 3 days passed before Derek called. I was in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a fishing lure, a hand-carved crankbait I'd been working on for weeks, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen, my son's name. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I answered. "Hello, Derek." "Dad." His voice sounded tired, older than his 38 years. "I need to see you." "I agree, but you come alone." A pause. I could imagine him looking over his shoulder, checking if Tiffany was listening. "Okay," he said finally. "Alone." He arrived the next afternoon. I watched him pull into the driveway from my spot on the back porch. The same porch where I had spent countless hours watching the lake, thinking about the mess my family had become. Derek looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. Thinner somehow. His shoulders slumped as he walked toward the house, like a man carrying an invisible weight. "Dad." He stopped at the edge of the porch, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sit down, son." He sat in the chair across from me, the same chair he'd sat in as a teenager when we'd come up here to fish together, back when things were simpler, back before Tiffany. For a while, neither of us spoke. The lake stretched out before us, gray-blue under the winter sky. A heron stood in the shallows near the dock, perfectly still. "I'm not going to apologize for what I'm doing," I said finally. I know. Do you understand why? Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Tiffany says you're trying to punish us, that you've lost your mind and you're taking it out on her. And what do you think? He didn't answer. I reached into the folder I'd brought outside with me and pulled out a sheet of paper, a spreadsheet I'd printed that morning. I handed it to him. What's this? He asked. 4 years of financial support. Every mortgage payment, every insurance premium, every utility bill, every charge on your wife's credit card. Total it up. I watched his face as his eyes scanned the numbers, the mortgage payments, the insurance, the utilities. And then, line after line, the credit card charges, spa treatments, designer handbags, restaurant tabs from places with wait lists and wine lists, shopping sprees at stores where a single item costs more than most people's weekly groceries. His face went pale. Not just pale, gray like old newspaper. His hands began to tremble slightly as he reached the total at the bottom of the page. $249,000. His voice trailed off. $600, I finished, give or take. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man who'd just been told the floor beneath him was actually thin ice over deep water. He swallowed hard. I didn't know it was that much. You didn't ask? You didn't want to know. It was easier not to. He set the paper down like it might burn him. When he looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. Real tears, not the manufactured kind I'd seen from his wife. Dad, I'm sorry. I don't want your apology, Derek. I want you to understand something. I leaned forward. That money? I don't care about the money. I have enough to last me 3 lifetimes. What I care about is respect. And for 4 years, your wife has wiped her feet on my respect every single day, in my own house, with money from my own pocket. She doesn't mean don't. My voice was quiet, but it stopped him cold. Don't make excuses for her. You've been doing that for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, last month, last week. When does it end, Derek? When do you stop defending someone who treats your father like garbage? He flinched at that, the same flinch I'd seen 100 times when Tiffany raised her voice at him. It broke something in my heart to see it. I'm not telling you to leave your wife, I continued. That's your choice, and you have to live with it. But I am telling you that I'm done. Done paying for a life that doesn't include me except when it's convenient. Done watching you disappear into someone I don't recognize. Done pretending that everything is fine when it's been broken for years. The heron on the dock spread its wings and took flight, rising over the lake in a graceful arc. You have a choice to make, son. You can keep living the way you've been living, in a house you don't own, with a woman who thinks kindness is weakness, pretending you don't see what's right in front of you. Or you can start building something real, something that's actually yours. Derek sat very still. I could see thoughts moving behind his eyes, calculations being made, walls being tested. And if I choose her? He asked quietly. I felt something twist in my chest. Not anger, but a deep, bone-tired sadness. Then I lose a son. I held his gaze. But at least I won't lose my self-respect. The silence stretched between us, heavy as the winter air. Somewhere on the lake, a fish jumped, sending ripples across the still water. Derek stood up slowly. He didn't say goodbye, didn't promise anything, just walked back to his car with that paper still clutched in his hand. I watched him drive away, then turn back to the lake. The hardest part was over. Now came the waiting. A week passed with no word from Derek. I kept myself busy, working on lures in my workshop, taking the boat out when the weather allowed, catching up on the stack of cookbooks I'd been meaning to read. Normal life, peaceful life. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window as a woman got out, mid-40s, professional attire, clipboard in hand. She walked up to my door with the purposeful stride of someone who did this for a living. The doorbell rang. I answered. Mr. Walter Pierce? She showed me an ID badge. I'm Patricia Nguyen, with Adult Protective Services. We've received a report of concern regarding your welfare and decision-making capacity. May I come in? I stepped aside. Of course. Can I offer you some coffee? She seemed surprised by the invitation. That would be nice, thank you. I led her to the kitchen, put on a fresh pot, and waited for her to explain. APS, Adult Protective Services, the department that investigates when someone thinks an elderly person is being abused, or when someone thinks an elderly person has lost their mind. I had a pretty good idea who had made that call. Mr. Pierce, Patricia began, settling into a chair at my kitchen table, we received a report suggesting that you may be experiencing cognitive decline. The caller expressed concern about some recent financial decisions you've made. Let me guess, my daughter-in-law. Patricia's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight flicker in her eyes. Confirmation. I can't disclose who filed the report, but I'm here to conduct a standard welfare check and cognitive assessment. Would you be willing to answer some questions? Ask away. What followed was about 45 minutes of the most politely invasive questioning I'd ever experienced. She asked about my daily routine, my finances, my medical history, my relationships. She had me count backward from 100 by sevens. She asked me to remember 3 words and repeat them back later. She watched how I made coffee, how I moved around my kitchen, how I responded to unexpected questions. I gave her the full tour of the house afterward, showed her my workshop, my fishing gear, my collection of vintage cookbooks. I pulled out my financial documents, the ones I'd prepared months ago for exactly this kind of situation, and walked her through my accounts, my investments, my income streams. Mr. Pierce, Patricia said finally, setting down her clipboard, do you understand why this report was filed? I do. I poured her a second cup of coffee. My daughter-in-law is upset because I stopped paying her bills. For 4 years, I've been supporting my son and his wife to the tune of over $5,000 a month. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, credit cards. I own the house they live in. It's in my name, always has been, and I've been covering all their expenses. And you've recently stopped? I have. 3 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law told me not to show my face at Thanksgiving dinner, called me an old fool, so I decided that if I'm such a burden, I should stop burdening them with my money. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a reasonable response to me. It's also my legal right. I've consulted with an attorney. The house is mine. The money is mine. I can stop paying whenever I choose. She nodded slowly. Mr. Pierce, based on my assessment, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. Your home is well maintained. Your finances are in order, and your reasoning appears sound. I'll be closing this case with a finding of no concern. I walked her to the door. Thank you for being thorough. Thank you for being cooperative. You'd be surprised how many people aren't. She paused on the porch. For what it's worth, it sounds like you made a difficult but necessary decision. Not everyone has the courage to do that. After she drove away, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the winter light fade over the lake. Tiffany had tried to have me declared incompetent. She'd actually picked up a phone and told a government agency that I was losing my mind. That took a special kind of desperation, or a special kind of cruelty. Maybe both. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Walter? Her voice was cautious. Did someone come to see you? Adult Protective Services. Nice touch, Tiffany. Very creative? Silence on the other end. Was that your best idea? Trying to have me declared mentally incompetent? Did you really think that would work? More silence. I could hear her breathing, shallow and rapid. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You have 42 days left until the eviction deadline. I suggest you use them wisely. Find a job. Find an apartment. Find a lawyer if you want. Though they'll all tell you the same thing mine did. I paused. And Tiffany? Don't ever try something like this again, because next time I won't be so understanding. I hung up before she could respond. The lake was dark now, the last light fading behind the trees. Somewhere out there, a loon called. That eerie, haunting sound that always made me think of endings. Tiffany had played her best card, and it hadn't been good enough. The social media post appeared 4 days before Christmas. I didn't see it myself. I'm not much for Facebook or any of that nonsense. But Nancy Coleman, my neighbor, came over that evening with her tablet tucked under her arm and a concerned expression on her face. Walter, you need to see this. She handed me the device. On the screen was a post in a group called Myers Park Community. One of those neighborhood forums where people complain about parking and share lost dog photos. The post was from Tiffany. "My father-in-law is evicting us from our home right before Christmas," she'd written. "After everything we've done for him, he's throwing his own son out on the street. We have nowhere to go. Please share this and help us raise awareness about elder abuse. Sometimes the abuse goes the other way." I read it twice, letting each word sink in, then handed the tablet back to Nancy. "Elder abuse?" she asked, her eyebrows climbing toward her hairline. "Is she serious?" "Apparently. But you haven't done anything wrong, have you?" I explained the situation to her, the abbreviated version, the house in my name, the years of payments, Thanksgiving, the eviction notice. Nancy listened with widening eyes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "Walter, you've been paying their bills for 4 years, and she called you an old fool?" "Among other things." "Well," Nancy's jaw set in that determined way I'd seen a few times before, usually right before she organized a neighborhood cleanup or confronted someone about their barking dog. "Someone needs to set the record straight." By the next morning, Tiffany's post had become something she probably hadn't anticipated. It started with a comment from a man named Richard Torres, who'd apparently been a regular at the Carolina table when I ran the kitchen. "Walter Pierce? The same Walter Pierce who cooked free Thanksgiving meals for the homeless shelter for 20 years? I doubt he's evicting anyone without good reason." Then came more comments. People who knew me from the restaurant, neighbors who'd seen me at community events, a woman who remembered how I'd helped her family after a kitchen fire destroyed their home. I'd brought them meals every day for a month. One by one, they spoke up, but the most damaging comments came from people who knew Tiffany. "I've seen how she treats that man," wrote someone named Sarah Whitman. "I was at a block party last summer, and she literally told him to go sit in the car like he was a dog. It was embarrassing to watch." "She screamed at him in the Publix parking lot once," added another commenter, "over something about groceries. He just stood there and took it. I felt so bad for him." This is the same woman who bragged about her designer lifestyle at book club. Guess we know who was funding it. By that evening, Tiffany had deleted her post, but the internet never forgets. The comments had already been screenshotted and shared across multiple neighborhood groups. The neighborhood knew the truth now, and the neighborhood had sided with me. I was still processing all of this when my phone rang. "Derek." "Dad?" "I saw the Facebook thing, if that's what you're calling about." "No, yes, but that's not why I'm calling." He paused. I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Something like determination, like the son I remembered from before Tiffany. "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I've been looking at apartments. Small ones, just for myself. I've been looking for the past week, ever since we talked on the porch." "Derek, let me finish." Another pause. "I looked at our bank account yesterday. Really looked. For the first time in years, I sat down and went through every statement, every transaction for the past 4 years. Do you know what I found?" "Tell me." "Nothing." His voice cracked. 4 years, Dad, and I haven't saved a single dollar. It all went to her. Spa treatments, designer bags, lunches with her friends, trips she took without me. And the whole time, I thought we were building something together. I thought we were saving for the future. I thought we were partners." I closed my eyes. This was the moment I'd been waiting for and dreading. "Dad, I think you were right about all of it." "What are you going to do?" The silence stretched. When Derek spoke again, his voice was quiet but steady, steadier than I'd heard it in years. "I'm going to find out who I am without her. I'm going to learn if there's anything left of the person I used to be." He took a breath. "And I'm going to start by apologizing to you. Not just for what happened at Thanksgiving. For all of it. For 4 years of letting her treat you like that while I said nothing." I sat there on my porch, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. "Hope." "Come see me for Christmas," I said. "Just you. We'll talk." "I'd like that, Dad. I'd really like that." After we hung up, I stayed on the porch for a while, watching the stars come out over the lake. The air was cold, biting at my cheeks and fingers, but I didn't mind. Something warm had settled in my chest. Not triumph, exactly, but something close to peace. Tiffany had tried to turn the world against me. Instead, the world had shown her who they really believed. And my son, my lost, confused, battered son, was finally starting to see the truth. Christmas Eve arrived quiet and cold. I spent the morning the way I'd spent every Christmas Eve for the past 5 years, alone, in my kitchen, preparing a modest dinner. Nothing fancy. A small roast, some potatoes, a salad. Enough for one person. The kind of meal you make when you've accepted that the holidays are just another day. But this year felt different. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't dreading the holiday. I wasn't steeling myself for the subtle insults, the pointed silences, the feeling of being tolerated rather than welcomed at my own family's table. I was simply at peace. It was a strange sensation, like taking off a heavy coat you'd forgotten you were wearing. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Derek. Dad, I'm leaving Charlotte now. I should be there in about an hour. Drive safe. The roads might be icy. I will. A pause. Dad, I'm coming alone. I told Tiffany I was going to see you, and she said some things. Some pretty ugly things, actually. But I left anyway. First time I've done that in... I don't even know how long. I felt something loosen in my chest. See you soon, son. He arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink. I watched from the window as he got out of his car. No suitcases, no gifts, just him. He stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house like he was seeing it for the first time, then walked toward the door with his shoulders squared. I met him on the porch. We didn't hug. We'd never been a hugging family, but something passed between us. An acknowledgement, a new beginning, or maybe an old beginning, remembered. Come inside, I said. Dinner's almost ready. We sat at my kitchen table, the one where I'd eaten alone for so many years, and shared a meal for the first time since I could remember. Real conversation. No walking on eggshells. No watching for Tiffany's reaction to every word. No tension hanging in the air like smoke. After dinner, we moved to the living room with cups of coffee. The fire crackled in the fireplace, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, dusting the lake house in white. I filed for divorce, Derek said. The words hung in the air between us. I set my coffee cup down carefully. When? Yesterday. I hired a lawyer. A real one, not one of Tiffany's friends from her book club. The papers will be ready after the holidays. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in years. He seemed different. Tired, yes, but there was something else there. A straightness in his spine that I hadn't seen in a long time. A clarity in his eyes. Why? I asked. And I want the real answer, not what you think I want to hear. Derek stared into his coffee for a long moment. After you showed me those numbers, the spreadsheet with everything you'd paid for us, I couldn't stop thinking about it. $250,000, Dad, and I never once said thank you. I never once stood up for you when Tiffany... He trailed off, shaking his head. When Tiffany what? When she treated you like dirt. When she called you names. When she made you feel unwelcome in a house you owned. At dinners you paid for. During holidays you funded. His voice cracked. I let her do all of that. I stood there and watched like a coward. And I told myself it was easier not to get involved. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. After Thanksgiving, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how she talked about you when you weren't there. The old man, your father, never by your name, like you were some kind of burden to be discussed, not a person. I noticed how she talked about me, too, about how I wasn't ambitious enough, didn't make enough money, wasn't good enough. He laughed bitterly. Funny how you stop hearing things when you've trained yourself not to listen. And now? Now I hear everything, and I don't like what I'm hearing. He finally met my eyes. I don't want to be the person I've become, Dad, the one who looks away, the one who stays quiet when he should speak up. I used to have a backbone. I want to find it again. We sat in silence for a while, watching the snow fall outside the window. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with my son in years, maybe ever. What about the house? I asked finally. The one in Charlotte. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Derek set down his coffee. Dad, what do you want to do with it? I'd thought about this question. For weeks, I'd turned it over in my mind, examining it from every angle like one of my fishing lures. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to start over. Clean slate. No more living in a house that was never really mine, pretending to be someone I'm not." He took a breath. "But I also want. I want to earn things for myself. For the first time in my adult life, I want to know that what I have is actually mine." I nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do." Before he left that night, Derek paused at the door. "Dad, what happens now? With Tiffany, with the eviction?" I looked out at the snow-covered lake, the peaceful darkness of Christmas Eve. Now she learns what it's like to live without someone else paying for her mistakes. The weeks after Christmas moved quickly. Derek found a small apartment near his office. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a view of a parking lot. But it was his. He signed the lease with his own money, furnished it with second-hand furniture, and for the first time in 4 years, he was paying his own bills. I watched my son transform. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden personality change, no overnight miracle. But slowly, steadily, he was becoming someone different, someone who looked people in the eye when he talked to them. Meanwhile, in the house on Elmwood Drive, things were falling apart. Tiffany had hired a lawyer, some cut-rate attorney who promised to fight the eviction. But there was nothing to fight. The house was in my name. It had always been in my name. Sharon Bennett had made sure all the paperwork was bulletproof. 2 weeks into January, I received a call from Sharon. "Mr. Pierce, the voluntary eviction deadline is approaching. Mrs. Pierce has not indicated any intention to vacate. Do you want me to proceed with formal eviction filings?" "Give her 3 more days," I said. "Then yes." The call I got 2 days later was from Derek. "She's packing, Dad. I drove by the house this morning and there were boxes on the lawn. Looks like she's finally accepting reality." "Where's she going?" "Her mother's place in Raleigh." "Where else?" He paused. "Dad, I want to be there. When she leaves, I think I need to see it. Then we'll go together." We arrived at the house on Elmwood Drive on a cold January morning. The sky was gray, threatening snow, and the air had that sharp bite that makes your lungs ache. Tiffany's silver SUV was in the driveway, loaded with boxes. She was carrying a suitcase out the front door when she saw us pull up. She stopped. The suitcase hung from her hand, forgotten. I got out of my truck. Derek got out of the passenger side. We stood there in the driveway of the house I owned, the house I'd bought, the house I'd paid for, the house I'd let them live in for 4 years while they treated me like an inconvenience. Tiffany's face went through several expressions. First, shock. Then anger. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened. Then something I'd never seen on her face before. Fear. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out thin, reedy, nothing like the confident woman who'd screamed at me 2 months ago. "It's my house," I said simply. "I thought I'd come see it." She looked at Derek. "Derek, tell him to leave. This is harassment." But Derek didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching her with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Derek," her voice rose. "Say something." "I've said everything I needed to say," he replied quietly, "in the divorce papers." Tiffany's face crumpled. For a moment the mask slipped completely. Underneath was something small and scared and ugly. "This is your fault," she hissed at me. "You poisoned him against me. You ruined everything." I walked past her, up the porch steps to the front door of my house. I pulled out the key and unlocked the door. "Tiffany," I said, turning back to look at her. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped paying for it." She stood there in the driveway, surrounded by boxes, watching as Derek and I walked into the house together. I heard her car start a few minutes later, then the crunch of tires as she drove away. She was going to her mother's house in Raleigh, out of our lives. Derek and I spent the afternoon walking through the empty rooms, making notes on what needed to be fixed. The house would need work. But that was fine. I had time. In the kitchen, the same kitchen where Tiffany had screamed at me to stay away from her Thanksgiving dinner, I stopped and looked around. "You know what's funny?" I said to Derek. "What?" She thought she was doing me a favor, letting me be part of her family, tolerating my presence in her house. I ran my hand along the counter, but this was never her house. It was never her life to control. Derek was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it. I know you are, son. I looked at him and saw the boy I'd raised. But sorry isn't what I want from you. What do you want? I smiled. I want you to come to Thanksgiving this year, here in this house. I'll cook the turkey. We'll eat a meal together, just the two of us. Derek's eyes glistened. I'd like that, Dad. We locked up the house and walked back to my truck. The gray sky had started to clear, letting through winter sunshine. As I drove back toward Lake Norman, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the plan I'd made, the son I'd almost lost and somehow gotten back. It wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been cruel. This was justice. This was reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect, my relationship with my son. Tiffany had called me an old fool. She'd told me to stay away from the table. She'd thought she could take, and I would never do anything about it. She was wrong. The game was over, and I had won. If you like this story, subscribe to our new channel, Cold Revenge, as this one will soon cease to exist. You can find a link to the new channel in the collaboration section of this video, in the description, or in the comments. Subscribe so you don't lose us and can continue listening to interesting stories about revenge. Thank you for your attention,